Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Dave Shaw, Chair of the Licensing Subcommittee. I would like to welcome you all to today's Licensing Subcommittee meeting. This is not a public meeting, but a meeting that the public can attend. Before we commence, I would like to outline the domestic arrangements for the meeting. We are not expecting a fire practice today. Is that still the case? Nothing? Yep, okay. If the alarm sounds, please leave the chamber, then turn right and proceed down the stairway and through the emergency exit on the ground floor. The assembly point is in the public square in front of Cast beyond the fountain. Anybody with mobility issues should wait in the refuge area near the lift and use the intercom to call for assistance. This meeting will be recorded and published on the council's website. By entering the council chamber, you are accepting that you will be recorded and your images will be retained and broadcast by the council. If anyone intends to record today's meeting, please ensure that this does not disturb the conduct of the meeting. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent mode or switched off. Thank you. I will now commence the meeting. Item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies? No, thank you. Item 2, exclusion of the public and press. There are no exempt items on the agenda today. However, please note that when the subcommittee goes into deliberation to determine the decision, all public and press will be excluded from the meeting. They will then be brought back into the meeting to hear the subcommittee's decision. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No. Thank you. Item 4 is the application. So we have an application for a premise licence, Townfield Thorn Road, Doncaster DN1 2JS. We are here today to discuss an application for a new premise licence for Townfield Thorn Road, Doncaster DN1 2JS. All parties who have indicated they wish to address the subcommittee will be given the opportunity to speak. The procedure we will be following is as set out in the report. Has everybody had a copy? Yep, okay, thank you. Can I now invite the licensing officer to introduce the item? Thank you.
Thank you. This hearing is to determine an application for a new premise licence in respect of Townfields Farm Road. The premises concerned is currently a public open space. This application seeks to license an area of the field for regulated entertainment for community events. I can confirm that the application has been correctly advertised and that the mandatory consultation has taken place. During the consultation period, representations were received in support of the application, against the application. The representations are shown in the members' report at Appendix E. I can confirm that all the required notices of the hearing have been given and all parties have been made aware of the procedure to be followed at the hearing, both in the notes that accompany the notice of hearing and in the hearing papers. The options available to the committee when making its determination are detailed in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now ask the applicant to address the subcommittee. Whoever is speaking, please can you identify yourself? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Nick Stopforth, Head of Heritage and Culture at City of Doncaster Council. Chair, I'm not here to represent any one specific event organiser or event provider external to the Council today. I'm here representing the service area within the Council for which I'm responsible, which is Events Doncaster, and also more broadly the Council, which has a responsibility towards and view on events across wide-ranging departments. Events Doncaster is a service within City of Doncaster Council responsible for the large major events which the Council provides directly and annually, as well as support to other large events such as the recent Armed Forces Day. The team works in partnership with various Council departments to ensure the management of safe and successful events, and also in close working partnership with the emergency services when planning larger events. Events Doncaster also supports community organisations across Doncaster which plan events throughout the year. So far in 2024, the team has supported at least 20 community organisations. This could be around 100 community organisations by the end of the calendar year. The team has a proven track record of carefully planned, regulatory compliant, effective events in Doncaster. We know from feedback and insights from events, as well as the wider evidence base, that well-managed, successful events bring wide-ranging positives to any city, including but not limited to an increase in civic pride and social cohesion, a positive impact on the local economy, and improved reports on people's well-being. The application is for the permission to plan for and host events which are council managed or where the council has an oversight in future. The events team licence is being put in place for any event that may apply to the Townfield. In doing so, the council is applying to bring Townfield in line with all other 52 parks across Doncaster which have a licence in place to be used as and when needed. For assurance, this doesn't mean that the volume of events will be increasing. It means that entertainment events will have a licence, if approved. It also gives us additional means to regulate activity, as we will only allow use of the council's licence, if this is approved when conditions are met around safety management and planning. It will ensure that all events, and some take place now without regulation in fact, but it ensures that all events are safe, well managed and regulated. It means that we can ask event organisers to put in place plans for parking, noise management and traffic, and we will have a legal framework to hold organisers to account. The Events Doncaster service and its partners will be compliant, and in turn event organisers will be required to be compliant. If approved, any event organiser would be subject to the same process required by event organisers on any other council land. This usually requires completion of a form online detailing the scope of the event. This is called the council's event gateway. Regular meetings of the council's event overview group assess all events to which it has this intelligence received and can communicate through appropriate departments to the event organisers, providing appropriate challenge and support. Events proposed which are larger in audience number or present specific issues or concerns are escalated to our Event Safety Advisory Group, commonly referred to as ESAG. This meeting of a partnership between the relevant council officers and our emergency services partners can lead to site visits, SAG meetings, and ultimately the issue of powers and prohibitions by relevant service areas. The ESAG reviews some of these following areas, which is not an exhaustive list, but provides an indication of the supervision and seriousness with which the ESAG takes its responsibilities, including at any event, the number of participants and profile of the event, the footprint of the event and the crowd capabilities and capacities, impact on residents, policing considerations, fire service considerations, a traffic management plan, health and safety, environmental health including noise management, and emergency planning. Any event organiser wishing to use Townfield in future would be required to follow this process. The licence applied for covers entertainment only, so should any event organisers wish to deliver an event with alcohol, they would have to apply in the normal way. Any event organiser wanting to host a larger event will be required to apply for a premises licence of their own accord to the statutory 28 days consultation. So if approved, the licence application considered here this morning is not a mandate to deliver events week in, week out. Any events proposed would be subject to controls and scrutiny. The licence application refers to 365 days a year because the council does not always know when event organisers will want to apply to host their events. So this enables the council to be able to regulate any event we are notified of as wanting to use the town field. At the moment, as it stands, there is no regulation. This application, if approved, will allow the council to ensure there is adherence to, and enforce where required, the necessary regulations. For the council and event organisers to be able to plan for the delivery of effective regulated events, this licence is considered necessary. But it is not opening up a free-for-all. In fact, the opposite. It's the start of a process that allows the council to regulate events and manage the delivery in a controlled way. There is a commitment from the council not to swamp the park with events. We don't intend to do any more than has been outlined at present. We just need to regulate what's already happening. Events Doncaster is working with various community groups in the area who are supportive of these current plans, and largely it's the community that we're hearing from and wanting to support planning for events in future, and which will need this licence to be able to do so if approved. I understand that there are community groups who are supportive of and involved in the delivery of the forthcoming Balloon Festival, and will be supportive of Pride in Principle subject to that event's own processes required. It's important to refer to this because my team and council colleagues from other departments will not develop plans without close consultation with residents in the local area. I might just, if I may, refer to a survey which took place in 2022 via Get Doncaster Moving, which asked the question of people in the town, living in the Townfield area, what they wanted to see from Townfield in future. Of the 1,181 people surveyed, 58% of respondents said they wanted to see community events, 58% of people said they wanted to see food and drink events, and 54% said they wanted to see live music. In essence, the licence, if approved, regulates what's already taking place, and anything bigger would require a separate premises licence and a statutory 28-day consultation. In summary, I'm not here to represent or be accountable for specific event organisers. It's for them to do that themselves. I am here as a representative of the Council, the Head of Service for Events, and as Chair of the Event Safety Advisory Group, to seek the appropriate way forward to enable safe and successful events which are regulated, and in future for this important asset for the city and to the benefit of event goers, whilst ultimately respecting and responding to the needs of local residents as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I will now ask the subcommittee members if they wish to ask any questions in relation to the applicant's submission. Over to you, Councillor.
Good morning. Would you be willing to make sure that there was a helpline for residents to get in contact during any events if they had any problems with noise or parking, anything like that?
Councillor Chapman, absolutely. I think it's important that we advertise the existing methods for enforcement, for example. We work closely with enforcement colleagues through the Event Safety Advisory Group, and we would be at pains to ensure that those close working relationships are very visible at the time of any particular event. At the moment, as I said in my report to you, there are only 2 events planned at this time, as we know. There's no further plans. So as things stand, I would want to reflect on that if I know Pride has got to go through its process already ahead, excuse me. I'd want to see them go through the process, and if going ahead, reflect on the successes and the lessons learned there, but it would have to include close working with our partners. And again, that includes the emergency services as well. So I think there's the existing ways of contacting the council and the role of the ESAG to help promote that and make sure that's happening effectively. But I am certain we could look at a direct approach as well through the events team at the time of events as well, so that residents are assured of a direct route to report any problems, issues or concerns, certainly.
Okay. Councillor Ely.
Yeah, I'm just reading in regards to public safety, but the area that concerns me is car parking, because we talk about anything from 500 to 10,000 potentially being on site. Individuals, that is. There's going to be a problem with, and some of the objectives have mentioned car parking as an issue, and it's not just there at any of the other areas that we've got under our wing, shall we say. It's the regulation of it, and it is the enforcement of it. How's that going to be achieved?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think for any large-scale event, well, firstly, if I might take a step back, there's a principle around the numbers, isn't there, for 500 being for a licence of a certain type. We go beyond that 499 threshold. So whilst the parameters say 500 upwards to 10,000, it doesn't necessarily mean anywhere near 10,000. I think I just need to give that assurance. We are not talking about 10,000 routinely. In fact, that would be extraordinary, really. So supplementary to that, I think any event site, including the proposal for Townfield, has to be considered with any event management plan within the merits of what is being proposed and what is reasonably and practically achievable. For some events we've seen managed elsewhere, sometimes on-site parking hasn't been practical and the event organisers had to take other means, such as working with local bus providers to provide shuttle bus services. We achieved this successfully, as an example, with the visit of Flying Scotsman last November, I think it was, whereby there was no direct on-site parking in the area of the rail tracks. Upwards towards 5,000 people attended the event, but most used a shuttle bus service or parked elsewhere and walked to the site. So, as I say, each event has to be looked at on its merits. I'm acutely aware of, because I visit the area, I've walked the area, I travel through the area, of, and I hear it from residents as a head of service, as to the pressures on parking in the area. And I think any event management plan from any event organiser has to respect that, and for Town Field actually has to find a different solution, because it's not going to be car parking, not in the streets, not on street, and not on roads that affect residents directly in that way. So there has to be in the event planning, and this is where the role of, I think, the ESAG is so important, because we'll inspect this and there will be officers from regulatory services within the ESAG who should be scrutinising that. And as chair of the ESAG, I would be calling on my peer heads of service and their teams to ensure that if there are pressures on parking because an event management plan, well, it will be followed, but maybe people turn up anyway. We can't always anticipate. We can try and manage as best we can, but if people turn up, that is enforced on that date. And I think that requires joint planning, clear communication, and a set of principles at the start, as I say, about respecting residents' needs and taking car parking away as an issue from the streets where people live.
Morning, Nick. I'd just like to ask, how many events do you plan on holding throughout the year, and also what kind of events will you be putting on?
So at the moment, thank you, Councillor. At the moment, there are 2 events planned or proposed for Townfield, which we know about clearly. The Balloon Festival, which has already been through its process, and Doncaster Pride, which will be going through a process. Aside from that, from a council perspective, we have no other events planned at this point in time. What the licence, if approved, would enable would be the consideration of events. But I would suggest, Councillor, that any events planned for Townfield in future would actually predominantly be led by the community, and my team and council departments would support growth of appropriate events. But what those might look like for the community groups in the area would be determined by the community. We already see some types of events at Townfield that I know of, but if I think about elsewhere around Doncaster, clearly we just had Bentley Bonanza at the weekend, of course. There are numerous galas and fairs, but I don't think that's my role as ESAG chair or the representative of the council today to say in definite terms. I think if I was to put forward a view on it, I'd say we'd be talking about events probably with people in their hundreds, low thousands, 1 to 2,000, very much community orientated. I don't know that answers your question fully, but I think the point around community consultation is so important, and community owning that with support from council officers to get it right.
Thanks for that. I've got a couple of questions. Just going back to Councillor Chapman's point about the contact telephone number, how would you feel if that was part of the condition of the licence? Because I hear what you're saying, that, yeah, okay, well, we'll look at that. But I think, you'll be aware as a senior officer, if it's not in writing, it's relatively meaningless. So that would be something that I would want to have written as a condition. Would that be an issue for you?
Chair, that's no issue. Chair, that's no issue. We will provide a named contact and telephone number.
Okay, and that would be, so that was available for throughout the build-up and the period of the event. Yeah. Okay.
For any event, we have a build-up period. If it's a larger event, build-up period, the date of the event, and a D-rig. Yeah. It would be available and advertised to local residents for the duration of that period.
Okay, because just to sort of bring something slightly in, the Armed Forces Day, the consultation. I've received certain representations where the consultation wasn't great, and there were people who couldn't move the cars on the day as a result of being blocked in. So it's something that needs to be addressed. That's the second event that's been held in the area where residents have not had something pushed through their letterbox, Pride being the last event on Elfield. So that's something that does need to be addressed if we're talking about consulting with residents. The least we can do is to give them a detailed guide to when, why and what. So that I would kind of expect that to going forward any future events. In terms of the number of events, again, I feel as though it's something that I'd like to get to the point where we tie it down to some kind of number, in that, again, if it's not written down, then it you know, mission creep does slip in. What have you any views on practically what that might look like, given that we are going to have a concentration of events in the summer months? So I'd kind of quite like to get some sort of feel of a number that you'd be happy for us to condition in.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the numbers in terms of the events planned at the moment. We know about, as I say, the Balloon Festival, Pride with its process to go through. I'm just being reminded, apologies, Chair, that there's also Race for Life as well. So I think when we add into the mixed community events, I'm getting 8 per annum.
Bearing in mind that some of those would be very small events. The community events, you're looking at 100 people.
Okay. Well, that's it's good to get a feel and put a figure on it, you know, because obviously if all went well, you know, I'm sure you might want to come back at some point and renegotiate that. But I think in the first instance, it would be good to have a feel and give residents some confidence that, you know, we're not going to be having, you know, too many events disturbing their general sort of day-to-day life.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate that, because I think that does provide a form of certainty for residents, which is really important. We're really keen to ensure that any learning from events is applied on an ongoing basis. And just going back to your point around Armed Forces Day, we are acutely aware that there was an issue with the traffic management on the day, which led to issues that shouldn't have been there. Going to your point around the event publicity as part of engagement, I'm sure that's something we can look at and work with council departments to make sure that happens, so that residents are aware in good time as to what is being planned and why and when. And I think I hear your point very clearly then about this provides some assurance to residents that it's not beyond a number, and that's really important. And as I said in my points earlier, this is not to open some kind of free-for-all. In fact, it's the opposite. It's to provide some certainties around well-managed, regulated events. And 8 feels like a number which gives some room for community groups to do, as my colleague Anita says as well, smaller events. But we can also reflect on that as we go through year on year and return to you and report on that if required.
Okay. So I think I would just like to talk a little bit about noise management. Obviously, it's absolutely a residential area. It's surrounded by housing at depth, so it's not a row of houses round, and then, you know, it's the community. Obviously, noise is pervasive. It doesn't restrict itself to the first line of receptors. Noise moves in very, very strange ways, and particularly in that area, which is kind of a bit of a bowl, really. So what I would like to know is how that's going to be, you know, kind of noise management is going to be assessed, and, you know, assessed during the event and assessed at appropriate points, i.e. receptor points. So we know, I know from experience I can be stood by a stage and it seemed sort of quite acceptable, and I could probably hold a conversation. However, you know, 300 metres away, somebody might be stood at a food stall and can't get communicate their order because of the way sound moves. So I would want to see some conditions there that set the parameters of how we're going to set sound, the expectations of how we're going to assess sound, what points, suitable points we are going to measure that throughout the day, and who's going to be responsible for ensuring that happens. Because it can't just be left to the event organisers, who on the day may let us down.
Thank you, Chair. So if I might respond to that then. Noise management, or the issue of noise, is something that is regulatorily enforceable, and it's the environmental team within the council that we work with through the ESAG to do the job as exactly you've described it and requested it to be. So through the process of receiving an event management plan, we will be looking through the environmental impact element of that as to whether the event organiser is addressing noise management or not. If they're not, we intervene. At the appropriate point in the build up towards an event, and this may be some weeks or indeed months ahead in advance, we have the opportunity, working with our environmental health colleagues, to assess the likely impact. And we start as a benchmark with the location, the residential location, which will be nearest to being affected by noise sensitivity. There is guidance, I believe through the Purple Guide, on limitations and standards around the amount of audible noise in the vicinity of an event. And the environmental health officers will be assessing that. We can test that as we get closer to the event with equipment that monitors things like amplification. And we're also mindful of issues, for example, around weather and wind direction, which can change again, where a noise may be conveyed to with greater amplification in one direction or another. I think within the event Doncaster application, there's reference to ensuring that events are managed sensitively to residents' requirements and the issues around the levels of audible noise by managing an event within a particular location in the park, so away from, as far as possible, proximity and edges towards residential areas. And this is reported on then back into the Events Safety Advisory Group. Ultimately, within that partnership, if an event provider is not fulfilling their duties around noise management, then it's a reason for intervention, and it's a form of potential power and prohibition. So we can put those brakes on an event, and we have actually taken those steps in other events in the recent past where we have been dissatisfied with the event planning of a large organiser, and that's been halted as a result.
I think it's kind of on the ground on the day, really. I mean, obviously, you go through the ESAG. I think what I'm really pushing for is for us to develop a shall we say, ESAG to develop a blueprint, shall we say, because it's not about audible noise always. You know, it can be frequencies that vibrate things, and so I think that what I would like to see as chair is some conditioning there where it's we develop, as I say, a blueprint where we say, well, look, this is where the stage is going to be, because at the minute it says area of the field, so there's no definition of it's a big field. We've not excluded any area, which is we do have naturalised areas, which is a side of my main point, but for me, it feels a little bit loose that we're not looking to assess how sound may move and to take a position where we're saying, okay, well, these are the receptors that we've identified that we want you to monitor throughout the day, and and to take whatever steps to reduce frequencies or whatever may be resulting that's causing problems. So I think it's I appreciate we can look back and go, well, that shouldn't have happened and this shouldn't have happened. I'm looking for a preventative model specific to this site to be put in place initially. So if someone comes along, they want to put live music on, this is the expectation of what they will do. Does that sound like a reasonable request? Is that something that we can do? I appreciate it may require significant work.
Sorry. Page 13 of the agenda, It's the fourth bullet point, and about halfway down it says noise management plan, including residents' hotline information and designated off-site monitoring locations as agreed with environmental health team. Admittedly, there are appears to be no requirements of what happens with that noise management plan.
I think that's my point, really. I think any management plan, any risk assessment needs to be live and we're responsive to it. I think that it's currently, as far as I'm concerned, ESAG have absolutely no baseline to understand how sound travels within that area. So I don't see that you're equipped to condition or make a judgment on the impacts that might have on the community. So what I'm seeking for is that, you know, proactively we start that work, because I think that, you know, after the event is not really good enough. That would be my point.
If I might, Chair, then. So for your assurance, as highlighted, there's a process in advance of the event around monitoring, and the ESAG itself, you're right, does not have its own powers and prohibitions as an entity, but we do bring in and have as representatives on our group professional officers who do have powers and prohibitions and who are qualified and do undertake that monitoring as standard. That monitoring is undertaken by standard by qualified persons. It's also written into the terms and conditions of any agreement with the facilitation of an event at any certain site. So it is in there in advance for your assurance. I think for your further assurance, if there's a requirement that a condition is further certainty around what that blueprint is and how that works, then absolutely we can do that. And if it's felt a bit loose from your perspective, which I completely see and understand, I think it's because I'm here representing the council, particularly Events Doncaster, but the council broadly around this, the specifics of where, say, a stage would be, whilst from an events perspective, we're saying we need to be sensitive to residents, we do need to do all the monitoring and checks, as you're saying, rightly so. We do manoeuvre this towards areas of a park where it's further away from residents, wherever possible in any park. That on top of that, what I was going to say was, aside from that, we would expect to see this in the event management plan, of course, from the event organiser as well, and would challenge on that if it wasn't there to the certainty and assuredness of the qualified person. But equally, absolutely, we could take that as a condition to initiate a further blueprint around it in terms of a process and how that works. Okay,
and I'll not go on much further about this, but so the Purple Guide talks about, you know, it talks in terms of decibels, receptor decibels. It doesn't cover off bass frequencies and lower frequencies and frequencies that will vibrate buildings, glass doors, things like that. And, you know, so I know from experience that will be what our officers will be looking for. They'll be looking specifically for, you know, a decibel reading at certain points. That is, you know, not the whole picture by any stretch of the imagination. You know, if you've ever been a few doors away from somebody who's playing, you know, music and the bass is reverberating through a building, several, you know, so, and that's really my point. You know, from a personal experience, Pride, when they were in Elmfield Park, had a very, very good sound engineer who was very, very receptive and dealt with very low frequencies that even surprised him were at receptor points. And that's the sort of response that I'm looking and would expect. So, you know, obviously as a committee we'll sit and sort of discuss this, but, you know, that's what I think we should be looking at, that you know, there does need to be, you know, a sound engineer on site whose responsibility it is to deal with these things on the day. You know, anyway, I think you know what I'm driving at. I think I don't need to go on about that any further, but yeah, if you want to come back, Nick, that's good.
Thank you, Chair. And I think I could also give that assurance to you in your role as ward member, of course, as well, and for the town ward members, that this is something we take very seriously. If we look at a blueprint, if I work with head of service peers and their teams around the environmental health and also the enforcement, I can do that, but also pick up the point around a sound engineer who is as diligent as the example you've given, and that's taken as standard. We can look at that, and that the blueprint, what I'm hearing back then or saying back is that the blueprint is not only about decibels, but is about frequencies and other forms of impact that may be associated to noise, certainly.
Councillor Chapman there, thank you.
Can I just take you to page 33, please? B, the prevention of crime and disorder. The last line is, if deemed necessary, event organisers will be requested to attend event safety advisory group. Who actually decides if it is necessary, and who would decide which person? Would it be sort of the lead from the group or the committee member, or, you know?
So the Event Safety Advisory Group will receive information on events in a pipeline ahead in the calendar year, and will receive event plans so we will request event plans from organisers, potential organisers. And I think, as I said in my report earlier, if the Event Safety Advisory Group, which is chaired by myself, it has a vice chair who works in the emergency planning department of the council, specifically on resilience, has officers, competent officers from wide-ranging areas of the council, specifically from the Police Directorate, who will work on traffic management and network management, health and safety, environmental health, and so on. And then also we have representatives who work on event planning themselves or have a professional insight around event planning from the 3 blue light services too. When we meet, we will talk about what's coming up in the pipeline, and we discuss consultatively if we have concerns around a particular event that's planned for or in the pipeline. If we have concerns, would we bring that in for an ESAG? And as chair, I'll make a decision on that, but I will do that consultatively. And I defer to my colleagues with the competent professional responsibilities and also the blue light representatives. In terms of who's called to the Event Safety Advisory Group meeting from the event, it's usually, if it's a commercial event, it would be the event directors. If it's a community event, it will be the lead representatives from the community, particularly the person who's considered to be in a competent position to have written the event management plan and any associated event safety management plan.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in with anything? Okay, so I'll just ask a couple more questions if that's okay. Just one again on page 34. Says the issue of nuisance will be addressed by signage and the timing of the events. Seems to be a bit of a meaningless statement, that. I don't really understand what that means or what it implies, or, you know.
I expect the issue of nuisance would be covered by an event management plan. There does need to be clarity on what nuisance means in this sense. I would take that to mean whether there is the possibility of the event attracting people who may not be there for the event but might be there for other purposes and causing a nuisance as a result. And therefore that would need to be managed through an event safety management plan.
With all due respect, I can see you grasping at straws there. You know, I'll just read it again. The issue of nuisance will be addressed by signage and the timing of the events.
So nuisance, again, is multifaceted, isn't it? And I can see that there should be more clarity that was brought to that statement. Insofar as nuisance, of course, can be noise nuisance.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, what I'm trying to envisage a situation where a sign of any description will address issues of nuisance.
Yeah, I understand, Chair, and also it's multifaceted in terms of, so what the nuisance is, what's being addressed, is that to prevent the nuisance in the first place, or to assure local residents that it is being addressed? And then the timing. So noise nuisance, for example, the concern could be addressed through engagement with the public. The signage may refer to when the event is ending for an assurance. But more so than that, I would be struggling myself, Chair, to bring some clarity to that.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just bring
Can I make
Councillor.
a suggestion where the signage actually includes your emergency number? If we do some around the site with the number for complaints. Maybe sounds,
It would, you know, it would go some way to give it some level of meaning. To be fair, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank
you.
Right. Okay then. So, but same box. Organisers are required to choose a suitable area within the premises. Again, I would like us to, you know, to have more of a control over that. I mean, we may say they all want to be there, and you go, well, you can't be there for whatever reasons. That's understood. But I can, you know, it would seem to make sense to me that if we are to have a grip on this, we say, well, this is that kind of event, so you can be there. But this is that kind of event. You know, we know what our prevailing winds are, for example. You know, when if we start to develop an understanding of how sound moves in that area, if we get a grip of these things, then for me, you know, we should be saying, no, you want to put a live event on till 9 o'clock at night or 9:30, which is the cut-off currently on this application. That is where your stage will be, and this is for the reasons why. And I think if we start at that point, rather than then backtracking, well, we want it there, well, and getting into that argument, if you want to use the field, these are our conditions for this type of event. I don't, you know, so that I would want to see that firmed up sort of fairly quickly. As, you know, back to that one line, you know, there's a lot of vagueness within this application that concerns me.
As part of the event application process, that is one of the things that we do go through with organisers. So, for example, I use Race for Life as an example. When they first started having the Race for Life, they wanted the start and finish zone across at Townmoor Avenue. While in theory that looked absolutely fantastic, in practice it caused us issues. So the following year they were advised, no, you're not putting it there, you're going to put it there. They did object, they did stamp the feet, as you would expect, but once I explained the reason why we didn't want them to put it where it was, they thought it was a great idea. We'll move it into the centre of the field. There's less noise disturbance, there's less problems, there's less people driving past and potential incidents. They agreed to move the start and finish funnel. Because Townfield is so big, if we had someone who, let's say, Tour de Yorkshire, they were coming along Bennettthorpe, if we'd have said the fan zone has to be over by the pavilion, there wouldn't have been a reasonable reason to put it over by the pavilion. So we have to take each event on its own merits, on its own, you know, what impact each event could have on. So you could have, they had a ceilidh over by the Mugger. That was fine, it worked great there, didn't interfere with anything. But if you had like the Tour de Yorkshire, the fan zone fitted better at the Bennettthorpe entrance. So we look at everything as a whole, not just a case of there's a field, let's plonk an event in it. There's a field, where would it be best to be reasonable and practicable and fair to the residents and the communities in the area? Where would it be best to locate it? So, you know, it's all part of the planning process that we do actually do that.
I think what I'm trying to avoid is a year or two of experimentation where the community become very, very unhappy with the situation and undermine the viability of us doing any of these events. You know, I think that, you know, if we are to grant this licence, we want to be clear that as much, as many things are kind of pre-thought through rather than, oh, well, let's give it a go there and see how it works. I think I appreciate what you're saying in terms of the Tour de Yorkshire, but I would say that's kind of out there in terms of requiring a specific place, in that it was about an event coming through the town, and that kind of made complete sense. I would say that that's a real outlier in terms of the type of events that we're likely to have going forward. But I hear what you're saying, but I think it's just something that, you know, sort of to be noted, really, that I'm not sure why we can't be a bit firmer rather than being, you know, so open. But okay, I'll move on from there. Same box. Provide as part of their event plan suitable measures and mitigation for nuisance parking in the area of the park. So I wonder how nuisance parking can be mitigated.
I think that goes back to the partly to the original point made earlier, Chair, of working closely with enforcement colleagues to ensure that their powers and prohibitions take place. The event organisers of any event at any park or council-owned land are required to have, through the ESAG, a traffic management plan. And if that traffic management plan, again, doesn't work in a local area because it hasn't reflected on the needs of residents or particular issues that apply to one area of Doncaster, which goes back to Anita's point somewhat of each event plan is somewhat unique to the event and has to be considered on its merits, but there's a standard format to what we expect to see, and that includes a traffic management plan, then that would be included. So I think it's those two elements primarily. A good, robust traffic management plan that makes it clear, in this case, that on-street parking is not an option.
So if you could walk me through that. So obviously we've got smaller community events where there may be 50, 100, couple hundred people, maybe let's say the 500, drawing largely from the local population, probably not bringing any people into town. Then if we move to Pride or the Balloon Festival, but let's talk about Pride because that's probably one of the ones that maybe brings people from further afield. What will be the expectation of their traffic management plan, and how will it be expected that they mitigate, that Pride mitigate and prevent as much as is possible people parking in the surrounding streets? It's just to try and get a feel for how we will condition that to ensure that it has actually not a problem, because the fine words on paper, but by your own admission, we got the Armed Forces Day traffic management plan wrong. So if you could give us a bit of a view on that.
I would just, I suppose, qualify firstly, Chair, that I think there was an error in the execution of the traffic management plan by the traffic management plan company on the day, but completely accept the point. In terms of what we would expect to see from an event safety advisory group perspective around how the event provider is showing that they are diligent and mindful and effective towards local needs in terms of parking and traffic, I would expect to see in the event management plan for a larger event, I can't speak on behalf of Pride, and I expect this would come through at a later stage, but based on experience, I would expect to see reference of how people of such numbers who are interested in going to Pride are travelling into Doncaster and getting to Town Field without being able to park in the immediate vicinity. And that means predominantly to me the use of public transport or chartered public transport.
Okay, so just bear with me. So presuming people may be coming in on public transport already, so train and the interchange, how is what you're saying is that you possibly would like to see a dedicated bus service, chartered bus service possible for that day? Is that something that you know we would be looking to say, well, this has got to be part of your licence application?
From a licence application perspective, that's for Pride to determine, of course. But from my perspective as chair of the Event Safety Advisory Group, I can strongly recommend, and I would hope that that was picked up with any large-scale event provider, including Pride, that provisions are made for additional transport that alleviates and supports and manages the flow of people from the city centre to the event location and back after the event. Yes.
So just to drill down a little bit more, sorry, you won't get away that easy. You would strongly recommend is not a condition. So if you, I don't mean to pick on Pride, it's just it's the next event coming forward, and I have no reason to believe that they won't manage the event very well. They always have done in the past, but you know. So if an event, I'll stop referring to Pride, but if an event comes along and it's of 5,000-6,000 people, whatever it may be, during the day, and you say, well, actually, we want to see, to mitigate the issues around pressures on the local community regarding parking and travel and traffic management, we are recommending that you put on a dedicated bus service from, the interchange, and they say, well, we don't think that's necessary. Are you just going to say, well, we do, and they say no? So are we going to then say, because you said you would advise, would you enforce?
Apologies, Chair. So it's a distinction between my role as chair, where I'm not an officer with powers and prohibitions. I see the role more as maybe around convening and quality assurance. But as I say, there are officers with competent professional qualifications who can enforce. So as chair, I may strongly advise and steer. But if that's not followed through, whether it's traffic management or any regulated issue, I will immediately defer that to my colleagues to pick up from an enforcement related perspective, whether that's a council department or an emergency service perspective. Yes. I would just add, if I may, in terms of this specific point around traffic and access, we do work closely with Doncaster Racecourse as well, and there is the provision of parking opposite the racecourse, which would be available to an event organiser potentially as well.
Okay. I'm not quite getting where I need to be on it. I feel as though it's a bit woolly, and I feel as though we're going to fall back to an enforcement if there's a failure to mitigate, which is a concern, and maybe it's either I'm not understanding or
I'm not explaining.
Oh, you're not. Well, I didn't really want to say that, to be honest, Nick. But yeah, or you're not explaining very well. Yeah. But let's put it down to my understanding.
I suggest, Chair, then that there is a specific condition that you're looking for in here. Then, far be it for me to say, but as a committee, that would bring further clarity and a demand here to ensure that there is, for the purpose of a certain type or level of event, a condition which means that there is absolutely no on-street car parking and impact on residents in terms of traffic and car parking and so on.
I'm looking for something as near to that as is possible, because if you look at the town field as it stands, we cannot provide legal appropriate parking for 3 football, amateur football, that's probably not the right word, but, football matches to take place on a Sunday. So, that is already an issue in the area that we as a council are unable to mitigate.
And as an officer, I certainly will not be in a position to make that position worse. As an officer, I would welcome the licensing subcommittee here today to consider, a condition that makes that really clear for all parties. It makes it easier for me as an officer, in fact. And I would expect it would be an assurance to residents too. But we certainly can't add, if we can't mitigate for, what was it, 3 football clubs, sorry.
It tends to be like maybe 2 or 3 matches at any one time, yeah.
If we can't mitigate for that at the moment, then we certainly can't add to that pressure through any event plan, because that would be a nonsense.
And this is, you know, I know we probably, well, me personally, I'm putting you through the ringer a little bit, but you know, we kind of, I just want, you know, if we are to grant this, I want to have ensured that, you know, we've gone through everything that we really need to go through.
And,
Okay.
Yeah, I welcome that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I think probably for me, for the moment, that's probably done. Has that awakened any conversation from any? No. Okay, so moving on to the next part of the agenda. I will now ask the interested parties if they wish to ask any questions in relation to the applicant's submission. So broadly, it gives you those who are interested parties the opportunity to ask questions about the application. I won't be really strict on it, but if I want to avoid it becoming argumentative, so if we can broadly keep it coming through the chair, although if you turn to each other and address each other, I'm not going to stamp on it, but if it gets, you know, too tetchy, then I might intervene. Okay, so over to interested parties. If you could introduce yourself first, that would be great. Thank you.
Christopher Hobbs from Lawn Road. Chair, can you explain why we need this blanket licence, why events like the Balloon Festival, like Pride, they can't just go through an application which involves ESAG? I presume they do up till now anyway. Why do we need this kind of very open licence application?
It's probably not a question for me in the sense of So over to the applicant who will answer that. So you were doing as I asked and coming through the chair there,
sorry.
really, weren't you? Sorry, no. Yeah, thank you.
I can answer that one. We have numerous events across the whole of the borough, as you understand. Townfield is the only one that doesn't have a licence on it. And the reason for the application is so that any community events can go through the process that we want them to go through. We've just recently had one where one of the community groups has had a ceilidh on Townfield. And in order for them to legally carry out the ceilidh with all the regulations, they had to apply for a temporary event notice. So this is to kind of ease things for the community groups, because we're only allowed so many temporary event notices a year, understandably, but if they're limited to 499 people. So if the ceilidh became popular and 1,000 people turned up, they're in breach of their licence. So this is, it's not to have dozens and dozens of events on Townfield. That's not what we want. It's not reasonable. It's not fair. It's not for the community. It's to help the community have their small events, have their things that they want to happen, so that they can run their events more efficiently and safer.
If you want to ask a supplementary question, go ahead. No, okay. Any other questions? Just so you're clear, you will have your opportunity to address the committee more formally. But is there any other questions at this moment in time? No. No. Oh,
well, if we've Christopher Hobbs Lawn Road, it does say on the application circuses, but that doesn't seem to fit with other things we've heard. Could circuses be removed from what's in the application? It also says we're not applying for alcohol. Could that be a condition, that there be no alcohol?
I can't with this licence.
So this is an events licence, not an alcohol licence. So a separate application would have to come forward to sell alcohol. So this is, you know, at this stage, it's you know, it's basically the foundations of an events package, shall we say, that might be available to people who want to put events on. So this is basically, at this stage, it is about, you know, someone wanting to put an event on the Townfield and having a suitable structure to go through, which diverts them away from the tens, which I appreciate, you know, is relatively meaningless to you, but it diverts them away from that less appropriate route if they just want to put an event on town field. Is that? Do you want to just qualify that?
I can qualify that, Chair. That's correct.
I would say it's highly unlikely that there would be a circus on Townfield. It's on the application because we do have circuses, but it would be monitored, or the application process, if we didn't deem it appropriate or necessary. We do have a tiny circus that comes that takes up the size of a football pitch. From my own point of view, it would fit on Townfield physically, but I don't think it would fit within the ambience of Townfield. They would be advised to go to a different location. I think it's just on there. So if someone wanted to do circus skills or a circus workshop as opposed to an actual big top.
So, Chair, if I might add to that then, that if it's helpful to do so, we can bring clarity to that. We have circuses, as you know, elsewhere, onto the council land, for example, at the racecourse. Personally, I don't see any. Anita's right. There's no requirement. It doesn't fit in. If it was necessary to meet a regulatory requirement, that if there were circus skills or a workshop that was an ancillary event alongside another event that meant that wording had to be in, then I think I could understand that. But maybe the word circus is misleading, and if it needed to be taken out as a requirement, we would do that.
Yeah, I think that. I suppose the potential danger is that a circus that already organises in Doncaster down at the racecourse suddenly says, well, actually, we would like to move. And we say, well, we're not happy about that. And they say, well, actually, in your, in your licence, it says circus. And therefore, now there's a prejudice there, and we get into legal hot water in terms of turning it. Well, I know you're shaking your head, but you know how litigious some organisations can be. I would suggest that if there's no pressing issue to have circus in there, that it might be something that we take out.
Take it out.
Would that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that'll be struck out. Thank you. Gentleman at the back, if you could introduce
Couple of
yourself.
questions. It's James Short from 69 Timemore Avenue. I'd like to ask the representative, please, if circuses then don't fit in the ambience of Townfields, what events do fit in the ambience of Townfields? Because I think probably some people may disagree, but I would say that probably Pride doesn't fit within the ambience of Townfields as it currently stands. It's a very loud event. It's going to have a lot of impact on the area. It does when it's at Elmfield Park. I could hear it a couple of years ago because of the wind direction. As the chair was saying, the wind direction is completely uncontrollable. There are no safeguards. So what events, according to you, do fit in this then, and how can we nail down some certainty for the people of Townfields? There's a lot of people very unhappy about the fact that large events like Pride are going to be on the field.
I'm aware that Pride as an there is a separate licence, and I'm mindful we shouldn't be discussing separate licence applications. This is for Townfield. But Mr. Shaw's question about what would fit, that's sound. It's just I don't think we should be referring to
I think
Pride.
probably I'll hold my hand up. I've been as guilty as citing Pride. I think just because it's an event we all understand and we've been around for the last few years. So I think what we'll do is we'll avoid any inference towards Pride because there is a separate licence coming in. But I think that the question is valid as it stands. Not connected with Pride.
Can I ask the governance staff then, where does that
Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Can we just answer that part and then is that okay? Thank you.
Yeah.
So, as things stand, and as I've alluded to previously, or been actually directly clear, I think, about the predominant area of focus for this application is to support the local community where there is a desire, clearly and evidence-based amongst the community, to run events which in future are aligned to what is required from a regulatory perspective, but most of all as well to ensure that those events are managed safely and successfully for the community. So when we talk about the ambience of an event in the community, predominantly, from my perspective, we are talking in the large majority, about community events which a community organiser has sought to bring forward on Townfield. As I said earlier, at the moment, there are only 2 other types of events planned for. And I'm very happy as chair of the ESAC to take a very clear watching brief on how those events are conducted. One not secured yet, but in the pipeline with an application. But I will take a watching brief. If there are elements, mindful chair of not being retrospective and retroactive as well, but I think it's important to say that we do apply lessons learned, and if it was felt that Townfield wasn't appropriate, we change, we reconfigure around that. We do have to listen as officers to our residents very clearly. Aside from the representatives' own clear view, as I said earlier, there is an evidence base that there is a desire amongst the community to see events at Townfield, and we are looking to put in place, if this is approved, through the appropriate framework and licence for those events to be managed successfully. In terms of ambience, I don't think I've got much more to say to that, other than understanding your clear instruction around Pride. If I might just, Chair, say that Pride is a strongly supported council event, and therefore it's incumbent on me to work with council colleagues and our partners.
I'm sorry, the same applies to
Thank you.
I think I was trying to explain why I wouldn't refer
Yes.
to it, but
Yes, yes.
sorry. Thank you.
Noted. Okay, you were wanting to ask governance a question.
So you've just referred, Mr. Stopforth, to the methods of engagement in the community and the data which suggests that there's strong support for events on town fields. I believe you're referring to a survey that was conducted online a couple of years ago, 2022. That's the way it's been put to me in correspondence with the council. And so to add context to my question, I completed that survey in 2022. Before I moved to Townfields, I lived in Hexthorpe at the time, and I thought, oh yes, lovely to have events on Townfields. I have a completely different understanding of it now. So in my correspondence with the council prior to this meeting, I asked what other community groups were included in the figures, and I haven't been given a definite answer on that for that question. So I'd like to ask you today precisely what other community groups and members of Townmoor community were included in that consultation.
So I think that's more a question for the applicant, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it's 2 different forms of evidence. So I'm referring to, yes, a survey from 2022, which is part of the work of Get Doncaster Moving, a local coalition and partnership, which has, as I say, a response which I would suggest is statistically valid, as I understand. I would suggest is statistically valid in terms of the number of respondents and the information received. Separately to the quantitative information presented there, I'm aware that the events team working with colleagues in our communities team within the council has also engaged with community groups in the area. Anita, could you reference that for me, please?
The groups that I'm aware of in that area, there is the Four Streets community group. They're very supportive of, in fact, they're putting on their own events. The Townfield Friends of group and the Townfield community group. I do believe there are others in the area, but I'm not entirely sure of what they're called.
The Regent Square Residents Association wasn't consulted.
The consultation was carried out as part of the Future Parks project. They did consultations for 9 parks across the region, and Townfield was as one of the future parks.
So I think the chair alluded earlier on to what the reason might be as to why things couldn't be put through people's letterboxes on an individual house-by-house basis in the area. So my question would be, why would you not pursue that to get a full and statistically sound point of view on the use of the park? Because I have to say that there's a groundswell of opinion that we don't want large events on townfields, and there's a feeling that this will be an opening door to those kind of events. There's not enough safeguards to stop it being the case. So I think the question is, why not pursue a house-by-house questionnaire for this?
Over to the applicant.
Thank you, Chair. So, as I said, I think the data that we have is statistically relevant. We could indeed pursue a targeted, in-depth questionnaire locally. I suspect one of the reasons that may not have happened to date is purely cost. But I would also say that as chair of ESAG, working with wide-ranging council departments, including a representative from the community teams, a service manager from that team, and the emergency service providers who have their own licensing, within South Yorkshire Police, their own licensing requirements, I have had no contact through departments or other channels, which would include the council's own communications, looking at social media, for example, as to a groundswell in this area.
I just quickly coming in, I must admit I'm not as convinced that the survey is as statistically sound as you say, in that the effect, it will affect the wider community. So within the ward, there are around 9,000 households, probably 14 to 15,000 people, as the gentleman's just alluded. He was positive about it when he lived in a different area. So unless you become quite granular and look at the postcodes of people and say, so we've got 1,000 and odd people surveyed, 50% have come back positive. So that's 500 people. We've got a local population of about 14,000. Not of all will be impacted, but it's a very compact ward generally. So you can be at the outer reaches of the ward and it would still be in walking distance, parking and walking distance to get to the event. So I think that while it's an indicator in the right direction, unless you took out all the people from the postcodes that won't be impacted on it, then I would question that, and I would, to some extent agree with the gentleman on that it's, there's maybe some further work needs doing there if you're to convince the local community that it's something that they want to support.
Appreciate that, Chair, and if, as a response then, I might qualify what I've said with, as you said, Chair, it demonstrates a response in the right direction, but requires further qualification, then I accept that.
You wanting to come back?
Yeah, and I'll have some things to say in my statement about what it's truly like to live in an area, with 12 race meets, 8 extra events now, Race for Life, etc., etc. So, a real community response from that, and not just a survey, that someone from Wadworth or Tickhill could fill in.
Okay, thank you. Just stop me, Marie-Claire, if I'm overstretching it or I'm interjecting at the wrong point. We've agreed 8 events maximum a year, and obviously we have talked mainly about community groups and wanting to put smaller events on. How would the applicant feel if we were to be a little bit more tight on the conditioning and tie it down, and this may not be practical, but it's just a suggestion, and again may help to alleviate and put something in writing. Basically, what we've said is that we say, well, 8 a year, but, and I'd just say this figure, and it's not necessarily the right figure, 6 of which will be less than 500 people. So we look and we go. I'm not saying 6 is the right number. But if we to sit and sort of say, well, don't worry about it, these are predominantly smaller events, then is it possible to be give a little bit more assurance and say, well, there will only be 2 events above 500 or whatever it be, and I just think we have got to take the community with us on this, and I do think, as I've said previously, I'm sat here as chair. I may not be chair next year. I may not be a councillor next year. You're sat here in your position. You may not be here next year. We can all be very mindful and start out with intent. But if it's not written down, our intent goes with us.
Chair, I completely agree. And I welcome, in fact, the comments that I've heard, because if it leads to a better quality of engagement in future for residents in the area, then we will strive to achieve that. If there is a condition that specifies then a cap, a limit on a number of events within the proposed 8, then that's agreeable.
What would you? I mean, equally so, we don't want to stymie it. It is about a balance. So we would want. I think we'd all want your view of what that might look like, which is workable and viable, and a reasonable compromise to get to.
So I think
we may not agree with you, but
it may be that the objectors make presentations which may put forward their views on those figures. So perhaps.
So we leave the applicant to think about that and move on. Do you think is that what you're advising? Okie dokie. So we'll leave the applicant to consider that. We'll leave the applicant. Oh, do you want to?
It's a final question at the risk of being admonished, but keeping Pride totally separate. So I didn't realise there was a separate licence for Pride. So could you give us an indication of where that's sitting now?
No, it's not a separate licence.
Yeah.
It's an application for an alcohol licence. So
yes,
this is an events licence. Anybody who then puts an event on may then come for put an application in to sell alcohol. Mm-hmm. So the two are very, very, very separate. Does that answer your question?
It does. I can see where it sits now. It's on the council website, and it's closed for representations, hasn't it now?
I don't know. Perhaps
it has. Yes, my understanding is closed for representations. Yeah. So right, okay. So we're going to move on for the interested parties to now address the subcommittee. So if you'd like to identify yourself and organise yourself in order, I'm sure that you can do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking purely for myself, Tony Wrigglesworth, Regent Square. Thank you and your colleagues who you've addressed quite a number of the concerns that both my wife and myself had about this application. On a pure matter of record, before we go any further, I've got a copy of the notice of the application for the Pride event. And for an event, which somebody is applying for a premises licence and an alcohol licence for an event to be held in August. The cut-off date for consultation was the 5th of July, last Friday. The first point I would want to make is that, as I understand it at the moment, if anybody wants to hold a large event, they have to apply for a premises licence. And the application notice, the application I'm looking at, is for a licence to hold an event on a day during the month of August. I believe the Balloon Festival also applied for a licence, a premises licence, to hold the event. There is nothing to prevent any other organisation that wants to hold a large event on the town fields applying for a premises licence as part of that process. It seems to me, if I've understood the council's, Events Doncaster's approach correctly, that what they're seeking to do is to facilitate the holding of large events by removing the level of scrutiny that this committee, that an application to this committee imposes for each event. And if I've misunderstood, then no doubt I'll be corrected. The only significant point that I'd like to make, following everything else that's been discussed, is that the events will, almost because of their nature, all be held in the summer months. And whilst I appreciate the benefits of having a condition that limits the number of events during a year, I would also ask that the number of large events during any particular month be limited as well, so that we don't have a concentration of maybe 4 or 5 events in July and August. Whether it's reasonable to say one large event a month or 2, I don't know. But I think some form of additional limit would be a benefit.
Okay, just wanted to see if we can address the. I might be wrong about this, but I suspect the 2 licences that have been put in that way, because this is obviously this licence has not been, you know, so obviously they've gone through the old process.
Absolutely.
You know, I genuinely, if I'm honest, as chair, I do feel, if I'm perfectly honest, that this is a better route, that we can condition more. So you've already heard from the committee that we're looking to condition things. Those will be the conditions, which will affect all events, as opposed to every time through the other process, those conditions being having to put in individually and being missed or not being missed. So I do think that we have the potential through this route to set much firmer and more acceptable conditions as a whole, rather than individually through the other processes and individual application. That is my view. Would you like to add anything to that, Marie-Claire?
I was just going to clarify that if any event organiser wishes to, say, have the sale of alcohol, they will have to apply for a premises licence, and that is subject to all the procedural steps as this one, and members of the public and any responsible authorities have a right to make representations, and any representations will be dealt with at a committee like this.
Okay, are you going to make a representation? The gentleman at the back, you wanted to make a representation now?
I was going to make a representation, but just a question to, is it Marie-Claire, sorry, didn't catch your name. I don't know if it's a question, but yes. So with that large event in August, there's an alcohol licence application. But how can we work together, and how can the applicant work with us to make sure that there's input as well on other aspects of events? Because it's not just the sale of alcohol that's going to make events a nuisance. As I'll detail shortly, it's parking, it's cars, it's extra busyness, it's pollution, it's noise. So alcohol's just one strand, which I have to say adds a dreadful aspect to these events for local residents. But
if I might jump in,
yeah.
It's difficult, and you know, we have to deal with the 2 things very separately.
Yeah.
And in terms of alcohol licenses, there are far more stringent conditions and kind of hard lines that we can can condition. So, you know, for example, at this moment in time, we're saying, you know, all entertainment must stop by 9:30 on town field at these events. we may get a licence for alcohol to come forward, and I'm not saying we would, but we may for some reason say, well, yeah, you can do it, but you stop serving at 7 o'clock, for example, you know, so we have an ability to be very stringent around the licensing conditions. So I wouldn't, you know, my view is it's not a weakness of the system, it's actually a strength of the system in that we have another layer of intervention when alcohol is involved. You know, in terms of you talking about cars and things like that, that is an aspect of this. You know, but if you would like to move on to your presentation, that would be great. Thank you.
Chair, I'll just clarify for Mr Shaw's benefit. I only advise on the procedural aspects of these committees. So just to say, you know, if anyone who's made representations about an application, they're within their right at any subsequent committee to make comments about anything that you feel may or may not have been addressed by that applicant.
Managed to miss that, so can't make representations.
But that is just that is how these things work, isn't it? You know, notices are put up, and you know, whether it be planning, whether it, you know, there is only so much any local authority can do to inform the people, you know, that it may impact on, and I'm satisfied that for the most part, with the exception of some of the consultation outside of the formal process, that we do legally what we have to do. But just to reiterate what Marie-Claire said is, you know, she's here to keep us on track, make sure procedurally, I can't even say it, we are, it won't come out. We stay on track, and yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, but consultation is sort of separate to legal processes for licensing and things like that. Although it's part of consultation, it is actually, you know, I'm confident that we do fulfil our legal obligations in terms of notification. You know, you could always say that more could be done, but we have a legal duty to do a certain amount, and I'm confident that we do that, to be fair. But I think then there's also, you know, showing goodwill. But there is, and that's where we would pick up through the more informal consultation, which you've heard me be critical of that, and I'm sure, yeah. So if we could move on now, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I will need to go. I'm shortly going for a meeting with a member of Nick's team. So just to say, my husband, I've been reassured by the questions from the committee. I think they've been very helpful. The notice that was put on the town fields didn't give an email address. I know that the council generally likes to encourage people to do things by email rather than letter, but it only gave an address. And I think that may have put a barrier up to people expressing their views. Certainly, you know, it seemed a little strange having to actually write a letter and bring it in as opposed to email the council, and I would make a recommendation that in future an email address is given for that. And to point out that these events are not in isolation, they are cumulative for people who live close to the racecourse. They have to deal with the race meetings and all the other events that go on at the racecourse. For us at Regent Square, there is the noise that we get from the salutation from the Regent Hotel and from the what the Regent does at the time of the races. Fortunately, we know about that, we're able to plan it, and I think that's why any event needs to have a lot of publicity so that the local residents can know what's going to happen and can make plans accordingly. And also, as to say, finally, I would support your suggestion that there should be no more than 2 large events a year and that the others should be less than 500. I think that's a very sensible suggestion. And thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll just give you time to gather your things and get out before we move on. I will now ask the subcommittee members if they wish to ask any questions in relation to the interested parties' submissions.
I still need to.
Oh, sorry, I do apologise. Yeah. my fault. Yes, yeah. Do carry on. Apologies.
So, as I say, James Short, 69 Townmoor Avenue. I think in this scenario, probably of all the representatives, I'm in quite a unique position, say perhaps the Lawn Avenue. So I live near the bottom of Townmoor Avenue. It's extremely busy on the corner of Manor Drive. And I did want to just give you a little bit of context for the strength of feeling I have about this, because, we use constantly as a through route for traffic. We use as diversions for traffic all the time. We have 12 or more race meetings a year, which I have to put on my calendar and make sure that I've parked my cars outside, because if not, someone parks it outside. If you say anything, you've got nowhere to park, you get abuse. I've had people changing outside my house for the 10k run, so you've got the 10k run on top of that as well. I do absolutely hear where the chair's comments about noise travel comes from. So I was able to hear Pride, not last year, actually. Perhaps we were out, but the year before we were in all day. And Pride, you could hear the music, you could hear every song, every word of every song. If you have people come round to the house, you can't talk to people in your own garden. Race for Life, the same. You could hear absolutely every single word of the tannoy, so we know who'd won. We knew that they'd raised £42,000, which was fantastic. But again, it really disturbs you. It's detrimental to your health. And I've got feedback. I know we can't do it in this committee. I would ask the committee to accept a further 12 to 15 inputs of feedback that this will be a problem in terms of busyness from other addresses on Townmoor Avenue, right up and down Townmoor Avenue, and off Townmoor Avenue as well. So, it's quite hard. And then when you hear, that there's extra events or extra asks of that area, I do find it quite disappointing. So the busyness of the area, the pollution, the traffic, you do feel like you're going to be made into the district's party venue, and it is just not viable. We live in a residential area, as the chair said, and there are other parks which have no such residential aspect to them. We're surrounded completely by houses, so no matter where you put a stage, someone will hear that music, and even if it's far away. So the busyness of the area, I think, it is a real issue. And as the chair said earlier on, football being staged on an informal basis on town fields every weekend creates an issue with litter, with antisocial behaviour, with cars being parked and people being unable to get past, buses accelerating to get round cars. So there's that, the busyness of the area, really. And I think something which it's kind of come to me in this meeting, because there's been some excellent discussions around the inability really to mitigate for some of the risks and some of the nuisances that this is going to create. You cannot control the wind direction. You cannot control what people hear. And I have to say as well, there's been a lot of allusion to car parking schemes. The applicant himself said that people have potentially got the use of the car parking area that Doncaster and Bassett Law teaching hospitals use opposite the racecourse. We live in a society, and it's come to me since living where I do now for the past 2 years, we live in a society which is very preoccupied and values personal rights. And people don't go and park in parking areas that you designated as parking areas. They park where they can get away quickly, and they park where it's easy. And that is always on houses outside Townmoor Avenue, on Manor Drive, and on Alderson Drive. And that's what it feels like to live in this area every day. It feels like nobody listens. We are a busy area that nobody wants to do anything about. The promise of enforcement has been promised before. So we had a bonfire night event at the racecourse where cars were parked up and down Townmoor Avenue, which is banned by the council. Residents get parking tickets when they park on the verges temporarily. And I asked the racecourse managing director what could be done about that. She promised to ask the events management committee that's been referenced multiple times today to send down parking enforcement. I have never seen that parking enforcement. And I have been told by the council, I've got the emails, so I'm happy to submit them. I've been told by the council that there is not enough money in the budget to allow for enforcement to attend events. So how can the applicant, for me, and this is a rhetorical question, not for you to answer now, but I guess to demonstrate to the committee, I don't understand how the applicant can say any of those mitigations will have a significant impact on any of the activities on town fields. And it does lead me to, I accept that there are some events and some small community events, but it does lead me to think that town fields is just not suitable for extra events in any way in the current situation it finds itself in. I don't know whether that's because the applicants don't live there. It's very easy, as I say earlier on, to sit in another village and say, I'd love to go to an event there. It's great, it's lovely, it's green. But you don't live there and you don't experience, the constant abuse, the constant acceleration of cars, litter being thrown out of windows, people traipsing by, weeing in gardens after the races. So that's what it feels like to live. And I'm sure the chair, as councillor for this ward, hears that, time and again. And there is literally nothing you can do about it because we live in a free society. And I've been told that people park outside my house, undress down to the pants so that children can see it. And you say, are you moving on to the free parking, which is a few hundred yards away? No, it's a free country. I'll do what I like. Bugger off, So that's what it feels like. And then finally, busyness of the area, absolute inability to safeguard against the negative impacts on a really already busy and full area. We have no guarantee that the hospital will be rebuilt, so the hospital's there for good, and we get doctors parking outside as well, whether or not there's a car park for them down the road. And then finally, the process of consultation, which I've already really alluded to, I find really disappointing. And in the area, there's a high proportion of professional people who keep their eyes on this type of thing, and yet somehow this is managed to slip by with the council saying that there's enough evidence to stage more events on town fields. And as I say, I'd like the committee to allow me to submit retrospectively whenever, or I can send it you now to have a look, the 12 emails that I've got in support of my opposition to this from people around the Town Moor area who are really genuinely worried about the council's inability to stop a flood of extra events.
Chair, there was a consultation period, and unfortunately, if representations weren't made within that time, they can't be considered. However, if the applicant are agreeable, then at least it could be on record that Mr. Shaw mentioned, I'm sorry, apologies,
I do get your name a lot, Councillor Shaw, to me. And that and Jane Shaw.
As long as it's just the complaints. I'll have the good stuff. You have the complaints. I'll let you deal with that. That's great.
Fine, yeah.
But perhaps we can just note that Mr. Short mentioned he has 15 emails from other people concerned, and leave it there.
I would agree with the advice there. What I would say is that going forward, as we discussed earlier, there is always an ability to make representations after an event should there be issues, and to have the licence reviewed. So I would say that nothing is forever, and should the licence be granted and it not be suitably managed, and events not be suitably managed, then there is a mechanism by which complaints can be brought forward and the licence can be reviewed. But I'm sure that the applicant would be more than happy to receive those, but we can't take them into account in terms of our determination today.
And that's fine. I mean, what I would say is that some of these events are quite ephemeral, and once they happen, they've been and gone, like you say, and they're often at weekends. So I have, when it's been noisy, I've often considered, should I ring the noise officers? But there is a lengthy process. How are you supposed to submit your noise abatement complaint for an event that's been and gone? Short of going around and waving your phone in there and recording, it doesn't quite get across the impact. I'm not sure, on a weekend, are the staff available? Would we be able to call on them to say you need to get down here right now? Because I tell you something, the police don't come here right now. So, again, I'm not reassured by that, but obviously the chair would need to decide on whether they're reassured by that promise.
Okay, are you? Yes, right. So back to where I thought we were a few minutes ago. I will now ask the subcommittee members if they wish to ask any questions in related to the interested parties' submissions.
Regarding your last statement, if the licence is granted, we would put a condition on there that there would be a hotline for residents to ring straight away, so that will maybe alleviate. Well, I don't know about 24 hours, because I wouldn't want somebody ringing me up at 3 o'clock in the morning if the event had finished at 10 and everybody had left the site. But yeah, I think there needs to be a...
No, that's not the case. No, it's 9:30 for this license. Yeah. Do any other members of the committee have a question? No. I do for the applicant, and it is the enforcement issue in terms of, and I do uphold what the gentleman says. We do not enforce. We do not have traffic wardens working on a Sunday outside of the city centre. We do, as far as I'm aware, we don't have the resources internally to suddenly make, a number of enforcement officers available on the day of an event. So, that's something that we would want to see addressed, whether that is there is a further surcharge on the event or the department that makes provision to pay for extra staff to enforce. But I think that, my experience is that we certainly don't enforce. And it's a very difficult one around the football. We all accept that. Because we don't want to discourage people and young people coming and playing football, and we appreciate that if we start enforcing people parking, then people may not come and play football, but it still leaves a problem as it is. And neither, I believe, representations have been made to a couple of large organisations that do have parking in the area to try and alleviate that, and they've not been forthcoming with a solution, which is up to them, the private entities. So, thus far, people have attempted to solve just the football problem, and it's not been solved, football parking problem, should I say. So it's something that we do need to have some consideration. I'm not going to, if you don't, I'm not going to take any more questions from you. I think you've put your argument really quite well. So I'm going to leave it at that. I will now ask the applicant if they wish to make to ask any questions in relation to the interested parties submission.
No, Chair.
So all parties have now had the opportunity to address the subcommittee to summarise their submissions. I will now ask if the applicant wishes to summarise their submissions.
In summary, I think I said it in my statement, but ultimately this is about a balance between safe and successful events which have a direct benefit to many, many people who attend such events, whilst, and as we have seen through this meeting which I've welcome the feedback this morning, appropriate, meaningful consultation and engagement with the public to get to the right, or as near to the right result as we can that meets people's local needs. I think the point around enforcement has been made very clear, and that is something I will take away, Chair. We've made clear representations, I think, in terms of other mitigations. And I'd just like to say thank you for the representations made today and for your time in hearing this application.
Thank you. I will now... Oh, well, yes, I suppose we ought to go back to that, otherwise we may make a decision that's less than... Yeah, so Councillor Chapman's, we did, if I'm honest, we did have a little bit of a note passed back and forth in terms of the numbers. So you may want to just express your view in terms of the split between large and smaller events. So events under 500 and events, I guess, over 500. You know, what would you think would be a workable solution there?
Chair, based on what we're looking at the moment, I would suggest 4 and 4. 4 large events, 4 community events.
Okay. Right. Thank you for that, Councillor Chapman. If interested parties, one of you would like to just summarise your objections. If we can make it a summary, that would be ideal. I think we're probably out of time on the room, although I'm sure we'll carry on. What time is the room booked for? 12. So they may be looking for another room. Yeah. Okay. Carry on. Thank you.
I've got a loud voice anyway, but yeah. I suppose for me, the summary is, you know, this is a residential area surrounded by residential streets on all sides. It's currently used for quiet dog walking, quiet contemplation, and the odd event. We couldn't countenance it becoming a venue for many more events. So, you know, we accept that there might be something small, but I think for us, the inability to safeguard meaningfully can only mean one thing, and that's really no more events for Townfields than there currently is at the moment.
Okay, thank you. As we've now heard from all parties, the subcommittee will go into private session to deliberate. Members will now deliberate the application in private session, and all parties are asked to leave the room. Once we have reached our decision, you will be invited back into the meeting for the committee to present their decision. If you're unable to remain, please indicate now. You'll not be able to stay. Oh, yeah, okay. So if everyone will leave the room, and we will deliberate on the application. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for bearing with us. You know, we've obviously, you know, given it quite a lot of consideration. So we have reached a decision. So I'm going to read out the summary of the decision and the conditions. We have considered the application for a premise licence for Townfield, Thorn Road, Doncaster, and have taken into account the written representations made and the evidence presented today. The steps that are appropriate to promote the licensing objectives, the Home Office guidance and our statement of licensing policy, and have decided to grant the licence with the conditions at pages 12 to 14 of the agenda pack, together with additional conditions. Condition number 1. A contact number should be made available to residents for the duration of the event. The contact number should be dedicated to these events with telephone operatives available. Condition number 2. No more than 4 events per year with an attendance of over 500 people. No more than 4 events with attendance above 500 people, totaling 8 events. Develop a sound map, sound and frequency map, and identify negative impact on receptors and develop a programme of mitigation. Condition number 4. The event organisers for larger events over 500 people should be responsible for additional parking enforcement. The subcommittee heard from the applicant that their aim was to regulate activities taking place on the town field and bringing this into line with other parks within the city. It was emphasised that there would be more regulation of events if conditions and a legal framework was in place. The applicant stated that the Event Safety Advisory Group, ESAG, will receive information in advance. They will receive plans from event organisers, representatives on ESAG, including emergency planning, environmental health and blue light organisations. The objectives, specifically Mr Hobbs, Mr Short, Mr Wigglesworth and Miss Gladden, all made representations expressing their concerns around the event. They mentioned that events had been held previously on Townfield and other central areas, such as Elmfield Park, where noise had been excessive and nuisance parking prevalent. Mr Short pointed out that people parking outside of his property parked outside of his property and were in a state of undress and were abusive. All were concerned about an escalation of events. There was also disappointment at the level of consultation with local residents. None had been consulted effectively in relation to the application, something the applicant stated ought to be improved, and in future there should be meaningful consultation. The subcommittee members are sympathetic to residents, but consider the conditions attached to the licence would promote the licensing objectives. Thank you very much. So that brings to close the meeting, and thank you for all your attendances. Thank you.